So there is a pretty big report out in Politico now. As you guys know, during the 2020 primary cycle, I looked at these Politico reports a lot. I really like them because they kind of go deep down inside into a lot of the things that you don't know, and it's kind of inside details of what happens. So especially towards the end of that 2020 primary, where Bernie was kind of like he was going off the rails in terms of his election chances, and it gave you details about, okay, who did what, this person did this person did that. It was really it's really fascinating because you get all the details. Now, as you guys know, the idea of AOC primarying Chuck Schumer, who's about to be up for re-election, his re-election is during this next election cycle in 2022. A lot of people have been wondering whether or not AOC is going to run against Chuck Schumer. I, as well as other people, other progressives, have noted that Chuck Schumer has taken an interestingly more left-wing stance on pretty much all issues, which is kind of bizarre, sort of out of place and random. But we can all tell what the reason is. The reason is because he is afraid of an AOC primary challenge. And you ever heard the phrase adapt or die? That's essentially what Chuck Schumer is adopting here, that mantra. Because what he sees is in New York, he sees all these people going down, Elliot Engel going down and others, Joe Crowley, of course. Joe Crowley, you have to remember, that dude was like third or fourth in line of succession to be House Speaker. Like, that's a huge top-of-the-line guy, got taken out. Elliot Engel was there for like 16 terms or something insane like that, and Jamal Bowman takes him out, right? So his mantra now is adapt or die. So the adapting is becoming more left-wing. And what this report goes into is it explains some of the details of what exactly it is AOC is thinking, what exactly it is Chuck Schumer is doing. So essentially, to start off this piece, it says, just a few weeks after a group of young climate activists accompanied by AOC orchestrated a highly publicized sit-in in House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office in late 2018, their Sunrise Movement received an unexpected email from Chuck Schumer's staff. So do recall that AOC led that protest in Nancy Pelosi's office for the Green New Deal. You guys hopefully remember that. It says, could the rabble-rousers meet with the then Senate Minority Leader? He wanted to talk to them about his agenda if Democrats ever won back the Senate, which included tackling climate change, democracy reform, and economic and racial inequality. Before long, his team was asking for their support on a clean cars proposal. So what that shows you there is he was reaching out to the Sunrise Movement even back in late 2018 when that protest in the office happened. So it seems that Chuck Schumer is a really good politicker, right? He's really good at politicking. And so Schumer's outreach was likely no coincidence. New York, the veteran senator's home state, is the epicenter of the progressive movement's efforts to oust incumbent Democrats in Congress. And Schumer, who is up for re-election in 2022, has been taking steps both publicly and privately to steel himself from a left-wing primary challenge, especially from his biggest threat, Ocasio-Cortez. At the time of this meeting, AOC was fresh off her stunning primary upset victory. She hadn't even been sworn into office yet. But in the 2 years since then, Schumer has thrown his weight behind the plan to cancel student loan debt by executive order. He's voted against the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. He said, quote, nothing is off the table when it comes to eliminating the filibuster. That's only a fraction of the progressive moves he's made in recent years. It still hasn't inoculated him from the possibility of a primary. Quote, it's exciting to see how much action Schumer is currently taking, said Shoykat Chakrabarti, Ocasio-Cortez's former chief of staff, and I hope that progressives continue pressuring him, threatening a potential primary. This is with Schumer at the helm of the Senate. The prospect of a left-wing challenge next year stands to play a major role in shaping the legislation that comes out of Washington. That applies whether or not Ocasio-Cortez pulls the trigger, at least for the next few months. Here's where it gets interesting. It says the two-term congresswoman is seriously considering campaigning for the seat, but is so far undecided according to people familiar with her thinking. Multiple sources said her decision will be contingent on how Schumer wields power with his new Democratic majority in the upcoming months. Will he be pushed around by Mitch McConnell, or will he work to pass ambitious progressive legislation favored by the left? Quote, "It's dependent on what Schumer does," said Waleed Shahid, communications director for Justice Democrats, the left-wing group that recruited Ocasio-Cortez to run. Quote, "Schumer will have to explain every one of his decisions to one of the most progressive primary electorates in the country. And if voters think he's capitulating to Mitch McConnell, not organizing his caucus to deliver for working families, then he's going to be in some trouble." So what's interesting here is, of course, it's really, really risky to go for a Senate seat. Now, why is it really risky? Because you can't run for 2 seats at the same time. Remember, when you run for president, you can be holding a House seat or a Senate seat and continue to hold on to that. You don't have to risk your seat. But in this situation, when you're trying to make the jump, remember what happened to Joe Kennedy? He's not in Congress anymore, right? He made that risk to go up. It's sort of a high-risk, high-reward situation, right? Because if you win, you're one of 100 people in the upper house of Congress. You have an insane amount of power, at least legislatively speaking. And, that's a huge reward. But the high risk is you could be left without a seat in any house of Congress, and you won't even be in government anymore. So it's very risky. And it can also be a bad and poor reflection on you if you are to lose. And so it could diminish your political capital, which is what makes it so risky. So for the timelines I'm looking at, I feel like everybody, or most people, I should say, who are progressives, think that AOC is going to be president someday. I definitely think she should run for sure. She'll barely be old enough to run in 2024. I'm talking barely make the age limit, the age requirement. So I think 2024 is too early. I don't think she should run in 2024. So the question comes up, well, do you run in 2022 against Chuck Schumer for the Senate seat? It's kind of risky, right? Obviously, AOC is the only threat that progressives have towards Chuck Schumer, but it's a really hard job to actually be able to win that race. So I probably say no. Now, Kirsten Gillibrand is up in 2024. She would be a much easier target to take out in New York. She's actually one of the more progressive members of the Senate, surprisingly, when you compare her to the other Democrats in the Senate. She's actually one of the more progressive ones. At this point, who's more progressive, her, Chuck Schumer? It's hard to tell, because Chuck Schumer is at least ostensibly adopting a bunch of progressive positions. But I think she should run against Kirsten Gillibrand in 2024 because she'll be much easier to defeat. Kirsten Gillibrand lost a lot of support when she forced Al Franken out of the Senate. That cost her a lot of liberal support. So she's a very vulnerable candidate. Kirsten Gillibrand is not somebody who has a lot of core support, and her presidential run was so weak she had to drop out pretty quickly, and it largely had to do with the Al Franken situation. So she's weakened. I think she should run against Kirsten Gillibrand in 2024. Don't come out and say you're not going to run against Chuck Schumer in 2022. Keep that lingering there to keep the pressure on him to make sure he's as left-leaning as possible. But I say run against Kirsten Gillibrand in 2024. I think she has a really good chance of winning that one. Her political capital is way too massive to just be in the House of Representatives, right? I say run for that in 2024. Hopefully, I imagine she wins. I find it hard to believe she would lose that race, but I would imagine she wins. And then I think in 2028, I think you run for president after you've, at that point you would have that would be, I think, 3 terms in the House, 2 or 3 terms in the House. And, you would then be, in the Senate for 4 years, right? You wouldn't finish your term, but you'd be in there 4 years. That's similar, I think, to what Obama did, actually, I forget how long he was in the Senate for. But, it's a very similar thing. So you would have that experience. You would be growing your political capital even more, making yourself a more serious contender. I think running for president in 2024 would be way too... it would be way too premature. I think it would be a bad decision, logistically speaking. So I say... keep the pressure on Chuck Schumer. Don't say you're not going to challenge him, but don't run against Chuck Schumer. It's too much of a risk. I say in 2024, take out Kirsten Gillibrand because she's so much of a weaker target, because she has such a sort of weak base of support, and I think AOC can win. Then, you keep building that and then run in 2028. Now, which progressive runs for president in 2020, 2024? I have no clue. Who are the options, really? Nina Turner. If Nina Turner wins her House seat, that she's running for, that does make her a potential contender to run for president in 2024. But, Ro Khanna and Nina Turner, these are basically the options you have. So who is it going to be? I have no clue. But AOC is definitely the one in 2028 for sure. But it does indeed go on. It says, so far, Ocasio-Cortez has been careful to avoid tipping her hand in public. Quote, the congresswoman represents one of the districts most heavily impacted by COVID, and that remains her priority and focus, her spokesperson said when asked about a primary challenge. So some progressive organizations closely aligned with Ocasio-Cortez are likewise taking a wait-and-see approach to a primary, which they said could come from her or another candidate if she decides to forego a campaign. Whether it's worth the left expending a lot of energy on primarying Chuck Schumer in 2022 certainly depends on what he does in 2021, said Evan Weber, political director of the Sunrise Movement. We've already seen a lot of evolution from Schumer on a whole host of issues, and if he keeps evolving and actually delivers for Democrats and can be the leader we need him to be right now, that's the biggest thing he could do to avoid a big effort behind a primary from the left next year. And I do believe that Chuck Schumer is going to be able to fend off that pressure by capitulating. I do believe he's going to do that. It's another reason why I think running in 2022 against Chuck Schumer is a bad idea. It says, for those on the left flank of the party, the idea of unseating Schumer is appealing, in part because he's a member of a Democratic congressional leadership that they believe has faltered. His record includes a vote in favor of the Iraq War and support for repealing the Glass-Steagall Act. Says progressives acknowledge Schumer is no Joe Manchin, the West Virginia centrist senator, but he's also not FDR. Definitely not. And that's what they think is necessary to end COVID, revive the economy, and achieve racial justice. They'll be watching Schumer closely to see if he can pull off a massive stimulus package, pass climate and jobs legislation, and persuade the holdouts in his caucus to eliminate the filibuster. And so obviously it goes on to explain, he says, America needs bold change. We need immediate bold change. The worst economic crisis since the New Deal, so we have to act quickly. Just bringing up the New Deal, it really is a travesty that Bernie Sanders didn't go so hard with the New Deal in the presidential primary. But let's not go back down that lane, honestly, at this point. It says, despite his rhetoric, many progressives remain skeptical and scarred by what they viewed as an inadequate response to the recession by Democrats in the Obama era. A group of high-profile left-wing organizations are considering airing TV ads this year to pressure him to go big. Other progressive activists are taking a more aggressive tack and are in the early stages of supporting a challenge. Given her national profile, Ocasio-Cortez's allies are confident she would raise an enormous amount of money if she ran for Senate, perhaps as much as $100 million. She brought in nearly $20 million during a re-election campaign. Holy shit! Which she won easily. Many are also bullish about her chances. They think she would win, said a Democratic House source. Still, progressives know she has work to do outside of New York City if she runs. During the presidential primary, her staff talked to her about potentially building an appeal upstate by campaigning there for Senator Bernie Sanders. It says, those some in Schumer's orbit reportedly believe Ocasio-Cortez is more likely to pursue a campaign for governor or lieutenant governor. Her allies said she is more interested in continuing on the legislative track than pursuing an executive career. That's another interesting tidbit in there. Is she going to go the executive route and go try to be... She's certainly not going to run for lieutenant governor. No chance. Is she going to campaign for governor? I highly, highly, highly doubt she's going to run for governor. There's this really stupid, mystifying aura around Andrew Cuomo for some reason. Kind of like the aura that surrounds like Michael Jordan. Like there's that dumb aura amongst liberals that surrounds him for some reason. When he's so incompetent and so garbage on so many levels, he failed the COVID crisis so heavily. But for whatever reason, that mystifying element just remains. That would be a horrendous idea. It's a waste of time. And she's already down the legislative track. If you're trying to get to the presidency and you haven't even moved up into the upper chamber yet, I think that's a bad idea. I don't think that, as it says, her allies said she's more interested in continuing on the legislative track than pursuing an executive career. I don't see her going the executive route until running for president, obviously. It says if Ocasio-Cortez runs, Schumer won't be caught off guard like Joe Crowley or Eliot Engel, two powerful House Democrats who were ousted by Ocasio-Cortez, and now Rep. Jamal Bowman, respectively. Attuned to the political currents in New York, Schumer has signaled he is not concerned. Throughout my career, I do the best job for my constituents and for my country, and it always works out. I haven't had a grand plan like I'm going to be here 10 years from now, here in 20 years. I do my job well, and then the next thing sort of falls into place, Schumer told Politico. Schumer's also made notable moves to reach out to the left. Says his willingness to work with progressives is also extended to the congresswoman herself. Two politicians have pushed the Federal Emergency Management Agency to provide financial assistance for families to help bury loved ones lost to COVID. So Schumer's allies maintained that a key talking point that was used by the left against Crowley and Engel, that they were DC creatures who were absent in New York, won't stick to him. Schumer is widely regarded as a hard worker, known for his legendary Sunday press conferences in the state, where he zeroes in on hyper-local issues. Even many progressives privately concede that he is a constant presence across New York. Quote, the arguments that Congressman Bowman made against Engel were not ideological, but that he's not there, said Stu Lozer, Schumer's former communications director. This is not an argument that you can make against Chuck Schumer. So, I would say while certainly saying that he's not here was a big argument, that wasn't the only argument that Jamal Bowman made, obviously. Basically saying he was very ineffective and not doing anything. So there certainly were a lot of ideological issues. We saw what happened with the hot mic issue on BLM. So I don't really agree with that. So it tells me that they're kind of out of whack as well. They like to pretend to act like they know what's going on. In reality, they don't really know exactly what's going on. It's definitely interesting to see what's going on here, though, but here's another interesting piece. It says, Ocasio-Cortez isn't the only candidate whose name is being floated in progressive circles as a potential challenger to Schumer, however. Others include first-term Representatives Bowman and Mondaire Jones, Public Advocate Jumaane Williams, and State Senator Alessandra Biaggi. Bowman and Mondaire, there is no chance that they run against, against Schumer. There's just absolutely no chance of that happening. I mean, you're talking about first-term House members. Why on earth would they risk going for that? That doesn't make any sense. With Jumaane Williams, that's possible because he's public advocate, positioned in NY, so that's a possibility. But trust me, Jamal Bowman and Mondaire Jones, they are not running against Schumer in 2022. But again, that is the breakdown of this whole thing. I don't know if Chuck Schumer is somebody who is viewed as not a DC creature in New York, because I don't live in New York and have a pulse, have the hand on the pulse or the finger on the pulse of New Yorkers. But, it's clear what Chuck Schumer's been doing, and he's attempting to essentially be able to appease the progressive left and prevent them from actually primarying him.